All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good.
I am doing just great, thank you. My name is Jason Wood. I'm Douglas Jason Wood. So there's so many Douglases in here, so that you don't get mixed up. My great great grandfather had two S's on the end of his name, as did my great grandfather. Then my grandfather had one S, and my father had one S, so I have one S. Of course, I like the way the two S's look, to be honest about it. So I'll start off with this is my great great grandfather, and this is an original drawing of him.
He allowed us to scan those items last year. Wow.
Right, and since I'm the last heir, you might get them at a point in time when I'm just gone. All right, so that's that. My great grandfather worked in this. He worked me. He was a, he fought in the Civil War, and he is originally from Culpeper, Fauquier County. So we don't know what each of them have counties, but I think it was perhaps, as I was notified, maybe on the line, so they weren't necessarily sure. He died at the age of 37, but he fought the battle to relieve Richmond and Petersburg. And at 37, he developed diarrhea, which at the time they didn't have any cure for that. And then he was moved to Alexandria, where he died in the city of Alexandria. He had, I believe he had 5 children. And this is my great grandfather. This is also Douglas Wood. Kind of found like what's the fighter who named all of his children after him? Foreman George, and George. Right. So this is another Douglas here, and my grandfather here. My great great grandfather's wife's name was Susan. So when he died, my great grandfather had married Matilda, and my great great grandmother lived with them. To my understanding is that my great great grandmother Susan actually applied for a pension with some sort of financial assistance along with that. So along with that, my great grandfather was a livery driver for the bank president, and whose name just escaped me totally. Gosh, I can't remember. Anyway, he worked for the bank president, and this bank president had him drive his horse and buggy. So he was a livery man. And Dangerfield, Mr. Dangerfield Road was cut through by the railroad area because, from my understanding, was that he didn't want his horses getting spooked. So that's how you have Dangerfield Road. So this was his livery driver at that time. He had, I believe, 5 children. One of them died. His name was Douglas. The other one was William. So this is William Douglas, and he also had a Douglas Jr. So he had Mary, he had Amanda, he had Georgia, and of course my grandfather and the one that passed. This is a picture of Georgia. First, let me show you my grandfather. That might help out a little bit here first. This is my grandfather. And this is his sister Georgia. Now, Georgia got into the beauty business in New York City. And Georgia did very well for herself. So well, in fact, that she had a house on Stuyvesant Row in Harlem. She had a car with a driver. And she was, my aunt Crozet, who's my father's sister, had gone to New York City to visit because my grandparents sent her up there. And she told me about how they would go drive out to Yonkers every other day because she was building a house in Yonkers. So she'd get in the car and the driver would take her out to Yonkers and so forth and did other little things that she needed done around the house. That was Aunt Georgia. Now his other sister, Mary, well, I believe she went to Howard University. My grandfather told me years ago that he didn't go to college because he wanted to make sure that his sisters did well because a man could always find a job somewhere to make money. So he sent her there. Aunt Mary became a scholar and a teacher. She married Samuel Owen, who had one of the largest Baptist churches in Memphis. And there's a school in Africa named after her, after Aunt Mary. Amanda died younger, so I don't recall much information about her. I know that she did have a couple of children at the time, so they were somewhat orphaned at one time because her husband had also passed away. Then came along my dad. from my grandparents. Now, this is my great grandmother, my grandmother's mother, whose name I don't know. And this is my dad. This is William Douglas Wood Jr. Now, my grandfather here was able to acquire 2 acres of land in the Seminary area, and then he was able to acquire 4 more acres that he bought from a couple who lived in Washington, D.C. So what he did there was that with the land that he had, they wanted to build a school, but they had to have finances and they had to have land. Well, what he did, he sold 2 acres. He got $500 for it, but they also wanted some other money to come from the community. So the community, raised some money as well. They raised another $500. He gave all the money back to the city so that they could build a school. And that site is where T.C. Williams was actually built. In fact, I think it's more like where the tennis courts are now, on that side, around that area. They say that when you went down, there was a little dirt road called Wood Lane. And on Wood Lane, they had, houses. Some houses were kept up very nicely. Some were not necessarily so nice. But the reason why some were not was because the African Americans could not get loans to keep their property up. Also, the city, although they were paying taxes, they were not able to have sewer unless you were on Quaker Lane. You could not get sewer. You could not get electric. And you also could not get water. So they had separate wells that were all around there. Now, my grandparents' house was on Quaker Lane, so I remember they had electric, they had water, and so forth. And my parents built next door to them. And there is a picture here, and I know I'm not going by the slide now because I can't see the slide. If we go a little further to my grandparents, that's my mother, back, we gotta go back. All right, see, now this is my grandfather sitting in their home. This is my grandmother. See the lot next to her? That's where our house is right now. Just to give you an idea there. So that's how that works. So now, I'm getting my thoughts together because I'm not a public speaker, so you have to forgive me on that. So when it comes to the land, what he did, he gave that land to them, and then in, I believe it's 1920, I have this written right here. I believe it's 1925 is when they gave the money to the city to help build the school. Rosenthal, which was a Jewish immigrant, was the one who was building the homes. So that's what they had required that, and they would also add money to have the school built.
So it was a Rosenwald school?
Rosenwald School, absolutely.
Sears and Roebuck is the one that.
Yes, he was right. CEO and president, exactly, of Sears and Roebuck, and that's where he was. He wasn't the president at the time when he was doing it, but then that launched him up to become president of Sears and Roebuck. Let me see where the next slide is. So here we have Aunt Georgia. Aunt Georgia right here. She gained a lot of weight. She was a big lady, they say. She was a big lady. And they actually had to have a special casket made for her because that's how large she was. So that was there. And what do we have on the other side here? All right, now this is my grandmother, Jenny. Next to her is their daughter, Adelaide, my grandfather, and Crozet. Now, Crozet was the head dietitian of Howard University Hospital. Crozet also want to understand, when she was in college, she went for nursing and she went to Howard University. But she also went into pre-med, and they say that she set the bar so high that the pre-med students were upset with her because she was just brilliant, to be quite frank about it. She was just quite brilliant. She was also, I call her, if anyone has watched The Crown, you know how the Queen, that was Crozet. Am I not right? That was Crozet. If a joke was out of place, it was no expression. Just no expression. Primo lady. Now, Crozet was also the basilisk of the AKAs. She was also the president of Jack and Jill. Okay? And she passed away about, let's say, maybe 10 years ago or so. Yeah, unfortunately, she was bedridden and became more like a vegetable for a while, which is unfortunate. But she was really quite brilliant. Now Adelaide was my father and aunt's younger sister. Adelaide worked for, I believe, for the Navy, but she wasn't necessarily in the Navy, but she worked at the Pentagon. And I don't know exactly what she did do. Now my grandfather, I'm going to go back to him. He would actually make, am I jumping too much or do I sound crazy? All right, all right. Excuse me. My grandfather used to make radios out of crystals. So when they wanted to hear the Joe Louis fight, he would put together, make these little, radios so everyone in the neighborhood can come in and listen to the Joe Louis fight. And then sometimes if he couldn't get up, you'd see him, they said he'd sit like this and listen to what he was, hearing on the radio. And he loved the radio. Sorry, excuse me. Let me go to my next point here. Go to the next slide. Right. So my father was Tuskegee Airman. He didn't actually fly planes because, he flew, but he didn't fly in the war because he sprained his ankle. And the commanders really didn't want to give him that pilot's license to actually fly. But he did fly, and in his later days, he would go out and rent a plane and just fly for the hell of flying, right? That's what he did. And those are pictures of him at Tuskegee, and the left and the far right. Can you go to the next one? This is my mother, Arminta Wood. And for those of you who don't remember Quaker Lane used to just have a brick wall, and it was 2 lanes. So this is the picture of that. In fact, I have a little story that when my grandmother, every time I would ask to go to the store, can you bring me back such and such and stop by Safeway? And I go, right? So I would sometimes sneak out the door, go to my aunt and uncle's house and go up their driveway, jump the wall, get down behind it, go through the seminary, through the Episcopal, and go to the shopping mall to Bradley and come back the same way. So that was the brick wall. That's Mom there, and that in the far corner is in the backyard, me sitting on her lap, acting like a crazy fool. Now, Mom was a teacher. She ended up being a recreation director of Rose Park in Georgetown and also Mitchell Park in Washington, D.C. She loved herself some children. And also, during the time in Farmville, is anyone familiar with Farmville, Virginia? When they didn't want they closed down the schools as to not permit, they wanted segregation. So in doing so, she was one of the teachers there at that time. And she recalls how sometimes she was an English teacher and a PE teacher, how the uniforms for the team were always handed down uniforms, and they never got the newer uniforms and so forth. And you could always tell that they had been used and abused, but that's what they got.
Was she at Moton High School by any chance in Farmville?
Pardon me?
Moton High School was the black high school.
It may have been Moton High School. Yeah, yeah, that's right too. And she's originally from Keysville, Virginia, which is like 20 miles outside of Farmville. You go to the next one. Now this is Crozet here when they were in Germany, because they were stationed in Germany, and that's their house. That was here before any of the houses were built, and TC was built before us. And that's my uncle, Colonel Johnson. And they were friends with the Days, the Greens, the Millers. Who else, Gwen, am I missing out on that? The Pattersons. They all had their little clique, and they would have parties. And Christmas time, I remember this is the honest truth, every weekend they had somewhere to go. On Friday night, it was a black tie, right? Saturday night, it was a black tie event. And I tell her today, somebody would have had you arrested as abuse because you left your child at home. When you went, but they had a nice German Shepherd that always stayed in the house with me. Plus, my grandparents lived next door, so that also helped out. So we go to the next one. Now, this is my mother's father, and this is her. She's the one right here, and these are her sisters, and that's their family house in Keysville. That house was interesting. Their first house was built on a hill. My grandfather had about 280 acres, which the family still has. And he had built a house for my grandmother on the hill, so you could look down. I don't know what happened with that house, but they moved down to this house because I think he had loaned somebody some money or something, and they didn't pay back, so that was how they just said, we'll take that house. So they took the house, but that house had wall-to-wall carpeting and all the fixings on that. All right, next one. Some more of the party times. This is my Aunt Crozet and my father. This is after he had had his stroke. And this is us getting ready for cookout, which Gwen's parents were always there at those cookouts. You might have been there too, Gwen, right? We had that, and this is in the basement when they're having a party. You go to the next one. Okay, this is another party time here. That's my mother on the far side with Dad. I told her I put that picture and it looks like you're eating and you're choking. All right, next
Jason,
one.
I can tell a little story.
Please tell and help me out.
Convention in New Jersey or somewhere, and it came up that I was from Alexandria, and all the way there, somebody said, "Have you ever been to one of the Johnsons at one of those days parties?" I said, "No, but my parents."
Definitely. We would have we'd have relatives come down from New Jersey and New York for those parties. People would come from the Richmond area for their parties, and it was literally a party time. In fact, my mom is now 98, and she was on the phone yesterday with her roommate in college who just turned 99 yesterday. And this lady FaceTimes. So now, when it comes to me, I went to Parsons School of Design. My first year I went to VCU, and from there I told them I was not going back to VCU. And I always wanted to go to Parsons. So I went to Parsons, I majored in fashion design, and right out of graduation I had one job. It was with the Chrysler Corporation. They had a dress line. I never started that job because then I was hired by Valentino in Rome to design dresses in Rome. So I did that. Then when I came back from Rome, I did Kamali when they were on Madison Avenue and other manufacturers. And my parents said, "Jason, but you can't change jobs like that." And I said, "Why not? I always get another one." They said, "Well, because but if I don't like them, I'm not going to work there." She said, "But most people don't like the job." I said, "I'm not most people." So how I got into that is that I'd bounce to the next job till I found something that I liked. Now, there was one job that I was hired for, and it was designing belts. And I just come from Valentino, and they wanted me to design this line of belts. So I designed him a line of belts. He was gone for a week, and when he came back, "Jason!" And this factory was on 14th Street and 6th Avenue. It was like a whole block. "Jason, come to my office." And I'd hurt my foot, so I'm limping, going to the office. I said, "What?" He said, look at these. I said, "Yeah, they're belts." He said, "I know they're belts, but look at them." I said, "You don't like them?" "It isn't about me liking them. Do you know how much these belts will cost to make?" I said, "No, how much?" He said, $600 a dozen. And I looked at him and said, "Is that a lot?" And he said, "Yes, that's a lot. That's just a lot." So he took me into this little cage and showed me these belts were plastic hearts and patent leather. And I looked at him and said, "Well, I can't design that. I have no concept of how to design that." But that was one of my little stories on that. So this is what I did.
Which belts get made?
Huh?
Did your belts get made?
My belts were so ahead of the time. They were studded. They were studded. They had these nice buckles on them, and the man was just crazy. He was just maddening. So I released myself from that job because I knew I just couldn't work there. So I then decided to do some dresses on my own. So this was one of my dresses, and on the other side is one of my dresses. And these I sold to Bergdorf Goodman. I had this show was in a good friend had a beautiful home in Central Park West, and they offered their home for us to show this. So we had 2 showings, and the buyers came, and family and people of that sort. So Bergdorf bought some of these, as well as Nordstrom bought some, and then there was a boutique in Bethesda that also bought a couple of dresses. And that's one of my illustrations in the center, one of the fashion illustrations. So from that, I went into fashion styling. And fashion styling is where the clothes are provided, but then you have to accessorize everything, get the shoes, the whole bit. I did that for about over a decade. Fantastic job. You travel the world doing these shoots. And afterwards, you can go to the next slide, I went into interior design. So these are some of my designs that I have recently done. This is a home on Fifth Avenue. This one is in Livingston, and that one is in Chelsea. And the one on the far right, they wanted something that was very colorful and very happy, and it was like their pied-à-terre. So that's what we did for that. Now, does anyone have any questions for me? Because I don't know whether I've covered what you really want to hear and know.
Your grandfather, who was the first driver of a car?
My great-grandfather.
Okay.
Which is this one here.
And so can you share that story?
Well, the first one to drive the car. Yes, right. Mr. Dangerfield bought a car, and he was the first man to drive a car in Alexandria. So he wanted a Rolls Royce. Rolls Royce said no, because we're not having a black person drive our car. So then he bought a Packard, and then he sent him to school to know how to maintain the car and so forth. And he was very mechanical, as I mentioned, about the radios and so forth. So that was a story about the automobile. And also, I'll say that he was a liveryman. My grandfather was the first one to drive a car. It was the grandfather here. And driving the Dangerfields, and Mrs. Dangerfield, sometimes she wanted to have dinner in Hot Springs. So he'd get in the car and he'd drive to Hot Springs. So he was able to go on. He drove them on vacation, so he enjoyed the vacation spots. He also drove them to conventions, so he was able to enjoy the conventions. And that was his life. So I remember my mother says he would come home, and my grandmother had coffee on the stove, and he'd have his hot coffee and sit down there for a little while and get back up and go back out in the car. Yes.
Have all of this, plus perhaps others, been put on Ancestry.com?
I have not. How I got really interested in this is through Rose. Rose called me about that. So.
Because I would imagine that if you did that you'd start to find other links to fill out a much broader.
I'm sure we would, actually, to be honest about it. Yes.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering if you have any stories about the development of all the houses.
Yes.
Over on Woods
Yes.
Place and all that.
I do. The house on Woods Place, it was interesting because all those houses behind it used to be my backyard. In fact, they were contemplating buying me a pony at that time, but then urban renewal came in and took the homes that were behind took the land that was behind us and the homes that were on Wood Lane. What they did with that was really somewhat unjust because they took their homes. Sorry, I have allergies. It's kind of. They took their homes and gave them what they felt their home was worth. So if you wanted to build a new home, they would credit that to that new home. Yet at the same time, these people were paying taxes, as I mentioned earlier before, and we're getting no services whatsoever. So those who could afford it stayed and had a home built. Those that could not did not. I remember going out to that backfield, and my cousin Francis, who was Crozet's son, he would want us to play, wars. He dug these foxholes. I was not into war. I'd go out there for like 5 minutes. Okay, I gotta go. So anyway, he'd go out there and dig these foxholes. So after that, when they started digging the foundations for these homes in the basements, I thought they were just big foxholes. So there were all these big, holes in the ground. They were just all over the place. And I just recall missing the fact that when it would snow, my father had a tractor, and he'd hook us up to the back of the tractor and drive us and pull us all around that particular, property that we had. And then when we got a little older, the Episcopal High School that was right across the street, they allowed you to go up to the top of the hill and go all the way down. And my grandfather says he remembers ice skating on the pond that used to be at the Episcopal High School, which they no longer fill up anymore. So there was that. Then Then T.C. Williams was also built on part of the property, and that's when they tore down the little old schoolhouse, and that's where we are. Does that kind of give you the answer?
Yeah, real quick, we're neighbors. My family grew up at 1607 Quaker Lane,
Okay.
Lewis family.
Yeah, the Lewises. Yeah, surely.
Right. And my grandfather and father worked at Virginia Theological Seminary. Did your family work there? And second to that, did any of your family go to Parker Gray?
No one in my family worked at the seminary or the Episcopal.
Okay.
Parker Gray, I know the dad went to Armstrong
Okay.
in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And I guess Parker Gray at the time was the high school.
It was.
So they did not go. He did not go. And I don't think Crozet went either. Adelaide may have gone to Parker Gray.
Okay.
Yeah, she may have gone to Parker Gray.
Yeah, I know a lot of African Americans, I shouldn't say a lot, but several, Parker Gray until 1950, I think, went to the 11th grade.
Mm-hmm.
So students would go to high school in Washington to get that 12th grade and those credits. And other families would go there even earlier to have that type of matriculation. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
I think it's fascinating. Was it your grandfather, your great-grandfather, who wanted to send the women to college because the men could always find a job?
Yes.
Did that tradition carry on?
Well, actually, my father went to Virginia State. My aunt went to Howard University. My other one, I believe she went to Howard or Hampton. So they all went to college. And all the cousins went to college. You know, it's interesting in the family, you think you automatically go to high school. The thought was you automatically go to college. So it wasn't even a thing about, oh, I want to go to college. No, you're going to college. That was it. You know, and my mother's mother actually went to college. But my grandfather, my mother's father, had an 8th grade education, but he became a state county agent for farmers. And they had a working farm where they had cattle, they had horses, they had pigs, they had, vegetation and so forth. So they didn't have to need for anything. But he actually had a car also, and the state gave him the typewriter and the paper and all that little stuff like that. So he was kind of like a head honcho down there in that particular area, as well as his cousin is one of the first black to own a general store. And his other cousin, Zena was the first black funeral director in Virginia. So when my mother's father passed, they said it was raining, and they were like, oh my God. And I had an aunt who was in New York who, as my mother puts it, they had that big black Imperial. And they would say, and my grandma was like, how they can come in? This road is muddy. This road is muddy. So next morning they woke up and that whole road was graveled. Zena had made a call, and the state came in and graveled that whole road so that no one would get stuck or anything along those lines. So that was the story of that down there. Yes.
Tell me again, who was the first one to drive the car, your father or your great-grandfather?
My grandfather.
And what was his name?
His name is William Douglas Wood Sr.
William
Douglas Wood, yes. He's William Douglas Wood. My father's William Douglas Wood Jr.
Okay.
Yes. That's how that works.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question? I hope I was sufficient. Yes.
What has it been like for you to collect these stories? Is it primarily from family? Is there research that you've had to do? Are there other historians in the family who sort of shepherded this along the way?
It's kind of a combination in a sense. Like my mother tells me a lot of what she knows about the family. But as I said, when this slipped in by itself, that gave me a little more information on that. And I would say it's a collaboration, more or less. And what had me what got me interested was Rose and Char. I haven't got you, Char. All right, Rose and Char. In fact, Char is the one who actually called me and said, do you have some pictures that we need to bring in, and so on and so on? So I said, sure, absolutely. So we had these. But another I want to make mention of is my Uncle Johnson. He was actually the architect of the houses behind us. And there was an article where he said it was not fair because some people had money, and then you have those homes on Quaker Lane that are higher end compared to what they had, which would have been his and ours and grandma's, I guess. And they wanted to bring all the other houses up to a certain standard. So he really went down there and he fought hard. In fact, he got with Senator Booth, and that's when they went to the government. And there's a picture of him shaking President Johnson's hand. So they were really, they had what they call the Secret Seven. Remember that, Gwen?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Gwen's dad was part of the Secret Seven, as was my uncle. Okay, okay, okay. And I'll be right. And I just want to put this out. I think that in Alexandria, my uncle does not get enough credit for what he actually did. You know, when I look at things and I read about all these other people, but he did so much. And I would get, in elementary school, these kids would call me an Uncle Tom because your uncle is, you know, because you're the nephew of your uncle. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I never understood that, to be quite frank about it. But that's what I just got teased, because my uncle would go down there and he would negotiate with whomever was willing to work with what he and the Secret Seven needed to get done. So a lot of people who I sometimes say on a low learning curve, you know, were not necessarily understanding what was actually going on. Yes.
So all this history you share, is that found in some spot in this library?
Some of it is. I wouldn't be able to answer that completely, but I think some of it is.
This is why we're doing the family reunion, because we have holes, we have gaps, and we're relying on the community to help us fill those gaps. So we'll have a sense that something happened, and then we have no more.
Right.
And as we try and research it, there's this gap, and we know there's more to the story.
Right.
And so reaching out to the community and people like Char and the Black History Museum have helped us start to close that gap, so that that hole is being filled, and hopefully we'll get to a point where the history of the city that the library has collected is a balanced approach when it comes to the white communities, the African American communities, and the Jewish communities.
Okay.
And another thing, the neighborhood that butts against this development, they actually want to take all the property and put it as low-income housing. And they said, no, we're not doing that. And that's that area where Senator Booth was also living as well, because he was on Vicar Lane on the corner there, yeah. So they opposed that. So that was also something that kind of helped, I'm sure, drive where we are today there. And then my last little hobby that I do, for me, I do greeting cards. And these are, you can ask these around. I do these because I found that in so many instances, you don't see a lot of cards that actually represent people of color. So I decided to do a line of cards, and there are many more cards of designs that I have, but I just pulled those out really early this morning. Do we? Yes?
I was just wondering if you're doing any more designing or interior decorating or anything now.
Interior design, I still do. I'm doing that now. I would probably do a little more fashion design, but I don't have the seamstresses they got to be top notch. Otherwise, if they're not, there's no need to design it. Just like, what's that? It's ill-fitting. It's not working right. But I do these cards. I also do Christmas cards and so forth. And that's what I do.
Well, on behalf of the library, I want to thank Jason for this
Oh,
morning.
thank you.
It was a
Thank you.
conversation and a presentation, and so that's what family reunions are about. We come together and we're able to talk about the family history, and it ties in nicely with our own individual stories. And so at this point in time, we're going to go outside where we're going to formally start and kick off the Black Family Reunion. So thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.